Imagine walking into a room and suddenly realizing you remember it differently than anyone else does. Thought a euros trade as not imagination a euros. Our brains rebuild memories like a collage, often inserting errors or even whole scenes that never happened. When we think back on a birthday party, our brain does not simply play a videotape, it actively rebuilds the scene. The hippocampus first retrieves fragments of sensory input, while the prefrontal cortex adds context and fills in missing details. Because this reconstruction is guided by expectations, memories can shift subtly each time they are recalled. When the brain encounters a cue that resembles an old event, it stitches together past and present information to create a plausible narrative. This process explains why two people can witness the same incident yet remember different details. Small errors, such as misplacing a color or swapping dates, are common because the brain prioritizes coherence over exactness. Over time, repeated recall can reinforce these inaccuracies, turning them into seemingly solid facts. In some cases, the brain may even invent details that never occurred, a phenomenon known as memory fabrication. Such fabricated memories arise when emotional or social pressures prompt the mind to fill gaps with plausible but false content. Understanding that memory is a constructive process helps us recognize why our recollections are not infallible records. Researchers use techniques like eye tracking and neuroimaging to observe how the brain reconstructs memories in real time, revealing the dynamic interplay between stored traces and new associations. By acknowledging this malleability, we can adopt strategies such as cross-checking facts and mindful reflection to mitigate the influence of false or distorted recollections. Pause 0.8. When we remember an event, the brain does not simply replay a stored file, it actively reconstructs the scene from scattered cues. The hippocampus plays a central role by performing pattern completion, filling in missing details when only partial information is available. During encoding, sensory input is mapped onto distributed cortical networks that bind together sights, sounds, and emotions into a coherent trace. Over time, this trace undergoes consolidation, during which the hippocampal representation becomes increasingly linked to neocortical areas for long-term storage. Retrieval initiates when a cue activates the cortical pattern. The hippocampus then re-engages to complete the memory, often adding plausible but unverified elements. Because of this reconstruction process, memories can be distorted by current beliefs or new experiences that overwrite earlier fragments. Neuroimaging studies show that fMRI activity during recall mirrors the original encoding patterns, yet subtle differences reveal where fabrication occurs. The brain Eurostrade's plasticity allows it to integrate recent information into old memories, a mechanism that underlies both learning and false recollection. When we think we remember something accurately, the hippocampal cortical loop may have inserted details that never existed in the original event. Understanding these neural mechanisms helps explain why eyewitness testimony can be unreliable and why our personal narratives are often more fiction than fact. Pause 0.8. Memory is not a static recording but an active reconstruction that can change with each recall. Time delay introduces forgetting, as neural traces weaken and new experiences overwrite old ones. Interference from similar events competes for the same neural pathways, causing confusion or blending of details. Emotional arousal heightens attention during encoding, but also biases later retrieval towards salient aspects. The brain prioritizes gist over exact specifics, so peripheral information is often omitted or distorted. When we retrieve a memory, the reconstruction process can incorporate unrelated knowledge, leading to confabulation. Source monitoring errors occur when we misattribute where a piece of information came from, mixing imagination with fact. Repeated rehearsal can strengthen false details if they are rehearsed more than accurate ones. Contextual cues present at recall can cue related memories, sometimes substituting them for the original event. Social influence, such as hearing other Eurostrade accounts, can overwrite or modify our own recollection over time. Neurochemical changes during sleep consolidate memory, but also allow for integration of new information that may alter the original. Pause 0.8. In a typical classroom discussion, a teacher might ask, "Did you notice the red balloon at the party?" This is a leading question that nudges memory. The group's reaction often follows the cue. Those who hear the word red are more likely to report seeing it even if they did not. This phenomenon illustrates how suggestion can alter the content of an event in our minds, a process known as the misinformation effect. When peers share their own recollections, confirmation bias kicks in. We tend to accept information that aligns with what others say and ignore contradictory details. Over time, Repeated exposure to a fabricated detail can create a false memory, because our brain reconstructs past events rather than storing them verbatim. The source monitoring error explains why people cannot always distinguish between memories formed from actual experience versus those generated by suggestion or imagination. Media coverage adds another layer. Headlines that emphasize dramatic aspects can prime audiences to remember details that were never present at the original event. In a split-screen visual, we see the real scene on one side and the altered recollection on the other, highlighting how easily perception diverges from reality. Researchers use controlled experiments, where participants are exposed to misleading information after witnessing an event to quantify how many will later report false details. Understanding these mechanisms helps us recognize that our everyday memories are not infallible records, but flexible narratives shaped by social cues and external influences. Pause 0.8. Imagine you recall celebrating a friend's birthday last month, yet the calendar shows it was 2 weeks earlier. That simple slip illustrates how our brain reconstructs events by piecing together fragments, rather than replaying an exact recording. During consolidation, new information is woven into existing schemas, and later retrieval relies on cues that may point to the wrong source. When a cue matches a familiar pattern but not the actual event, the brain fills gaps with plausible details. A process known as source monitoring error. In everyday life, this can lead to misremembered dates, misplaced conversations, or even entirely fabricated exchanges that feel vivid and true. A common example is recalling a colleague's name correctly but attributing the wrong comment to them during a meeting. Such confabulations arise because the memory trace shares features with another similar event stored in the same neural network. The brain prioritizes coherence, so it stitches together the most coherent narrative even if that means blending distinct episodes. Visual overlays can show a faded memory trace juxtaposed against a constructed false narrative, highlighting where reconstruction occurs. By understanding these mechanisms, we learn why eyewitness testimony can be unreliable and how everyday anecdotes may be distorted. Recognizing the role of schemas helps us question memories that feel certain but lack corroborating evidence. Ultimately, awareness of false memory processes encourages critical reflection before accepting recalled details as fact. Pause 0.8. Memory is a constructive process that often blends real details with imagined ones, especially when emotional arousal colors the recollection. When we recall an event, our brain reconstructs it using cues, which can lead to subtle errors that are hard to detect without external checks. Source monitoring helps us distinguish where information came from, reducing the chance of misattributing facts and preventing false attributions that can erode trust in our own recollections. Corroboration involves checking memories against external records or other witnesses to confirm accuracy and build a robust evidence trail. Mindful recording. The capturing details immediately on a smartphone. Provides an objective anchor that can be revisited later. Using a checklist graphic during daily reflection encourages systematic review of key elements, making omissions less likely. The smartphone note app demonstrates how real-time input preserves context and reduces reliance on memory alone. Research shows that people who routinely record events report fewer false memories in subsequent recall tests. These evidence-based techniques work together by creating multiple independent traces of the same experience. When those traces converge, confidence aligns more closely with truth, lowering the risk of fabricated recollections. By integrating source monitoring, corroboration, and mindful recording into everyday habits, we can strengthen memory fidelity. Practicing these strategies consistently transforms memory from a fragile narrative into a reliable record that supports accurate decision-making. Pause 0.8. Memories are not perfect recordings but dynamic reconstructions that can be altered by time, emotion, and social cues. Understanding the neural mechanisms behind this flexibility helps us recognize when recollections may be unreliable and apply practical techniques such as source monitoring and immediate teching to guard against false memories.